I'm just giving everybody a moment to join. Thank you all for joining us here on our lovely webinar about event data. I'm joined here by Mark Maiden and Richard Kensett. I'll let both of them introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to jump right into this very exciting topic of event data. So, Mark, you want to start? And then Richard go.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, I'm Mark Maiden, one of the founder directors here at CrowdConnected. We provide location intelligence for next generation live events. So whether you're running a conference, an exhibition, an air show, a music festival, whatever your type of events, we help the whole ecosystem, the visitors to navigate events seamlessly, the commercial partners, the exhibitors to get more from those events through data, and the organizers to completely understand visitor behavior.
Amazing. Richard, how about Explori? What do you guys do?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm Richard. I'm commercial director at Explori. I'm slightly flustered having spent 10 minutes of technical problems before joining this webinar about 5 seconds before we started. But yeah, so let me give you a little insight into Explori. We're a customer feedback and event measurement platform, fundamentally. So we help organizers make better sense of their feedback data and yeah, just try and understand their feedback so that they can improve their events through that information. So we're technically an enterprise platform, so we work with a lot of the big organizers. I'm sure many of the people who are here today know all about Explori, so I won't spend too much time talking about it.
Amazing. Thanks, Richard. Thank you. So it's very exciting, right? Like event data, we have like tons of registrants and also people that wanted to join into the session. And I think that is because it is such a hot topic. But so we've kind of divided this session into a couple of 3 key areas. So we're going to talk about data. What is it? Like data categories. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how you collect it, how you segment it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about different use cases. So I know everybody has an idea of the basics of what they can do with it, probably looking at their registration data and what kind of 30% of C-level people attending their events. So everybody's familiar with the high-level stuff. But we want to dive in also to the more nitty-gritty details. What are some other exciting things that you could be doing and that you may be missing out on when it comes to sales, operations, strategy, operation, like what key things that you're kind of missing out on. But starting at the top, we've got kind of 3 broad data categories. The first one being demographical data, which we're all very familiar with. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that here, right? Like registration forms, exhibitor forms, all of that stuff. But then the next big category is behavioral data. And Mark, I want to go to you first to talk a little bit about behavioral data. What in CrowdConnected and in your perspective is behavioral data, and how do you collect it?
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, hopefully the audio is still working because I'm having a few issues. But behavioral data is essentially data about or insight that you might have about how the participants at your event, and we can describe a participant as anyone who's there, an attendee, a visitor, a person, people, they're all people by definition, how they are interacting with the physical environment and with one another. So a good starting point maybe is to think about if you were running a digital business, a website, for example, you'd have a lot of data about how people are interacting with every page of your website, how long they were spending on each page, where they came from, where they went to next, their journey around that digital environment. And if you transpose that to the physical space, we're really talking about the same thing. The behavior of people, how long did they spend in a particular area? They come through the door, but typically events have been very good at recording data, that demographic data, Tim, you talked about, from registration or from tickets or from whatever it is, but not so good historically at understanding how people move around the show floor. So that behavioral data, when we talk about behavioral data, we're talking about their journeys around the show floor, where they will go, how long they spend, and who they're interacting with. And there are a number of ways you might capture that data, but that's really what we mean by behavioral data, I think, Tim.
Yeah, no, agree. And I think, Mark, I muted you briefly because there was some background noise, so that's maybe what you experienced for a sec. And thank you for that. So I think that I agree with you, right? Like the behavioral data is like, what are people doing? And I think that, we've seen some really interesting perspectives of that as well at Grip, right? Like people are doing things, for example, I know big tech events where we've got startups and investors connecting with each other. And investors would say in the demographical data that they didn't want to meet with other investors. So they would say like, we're here to meet startups. But then if you looked at the behavioral data, you'd actually see that 45, 50% of the time investors would actually spend connecting with other investors. So I think that the combination, as you say, right, like of that demographical data and the behavioral set, combining those two can unlock a lot more value. And then we can combine it with this third set. So Richard, kind of switching to you, I'm really curious to hear, how do you look at that third set of sentiment data, and what is the value that brings to organizers?
Yeah, so just to take it real back to basics, I don't think I don't want to kind of explain something to people that they already know, but sentiment data, obviously we're talking about feedback, and predominantly we're talking about surveys, and that could be on-site or via e-surveys. It's really just trying to get into the detail about how do people feel about the experience that you're actually delivering. And I am biased, but I would say it's the most important part, and I definitely am biased, but because what the sentiment data can do is bring to life some of these other areas in terms of the demographic data, trying to understand, make sense. What difference does it make if you're from one particular job title or another job title? What difference does it make if you have people from this part of the country or that part of the country, or this, this part of the world or that part of the world? And what difference does it make if people have 3 meetings on average versus 10 meetings on average? You're trying to understand at all times, how does that affect their sentiment, their satisfaction, their advocacy, their NPS, and so on. So that's where sentiment data plugs in.
And you give, like, I want to kind of double click on like something that you mentioned there around like behavioral data, which is number of meetings, right? And overlaying that with sentiment data. Do you have some examples of like kind of great use cases where you've combined maybe some of those data sets as Explori and say, hey, this actually unlocked like a really like new value and new insight that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to capture?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, really. I mean, if I'm being totally honest, I think there's fewer cases of people combining these data sets than there probably should be. We've definitely done it on multiple occasions before, but more during the pandemic when we had virtual events and hybrid events were more common. Now we need to, encourage organizers to consider blending these two data sets, because using that behavioral data and understanding how it does impact sentiment is a good way to bring it to life. But the exact example I just mentioned was from a specific client where we were looking at the number of meetings that were scheduled. And there's a key point in time for that particular event where people go from being, either not satisfied to mildly satisfied to particularly satisfied. It's an event that focused more significantly on networking. And over a certain point, the organizer then learned that delivered the satisfaction. So let's say after 7 meetings, if you know that you need to try and deliver 7 meetings in order to deliver the level of satisfaction that's over and above the benchmark, then as a team, you can focus on, okay, this is the number we need to try and get people to. So I think that's where it kind of comes into action, if you like. And that's why I think the sentiment data is the important piece of the jigsaw there.
Yeah. And kind of, another one that we can look at, right? Like if we look at these 3 data sets in terms of collection. And so if we take a moment to talk about how they are collected, demographical data, because they're part of the registration process, you've got kind of everyone that it covers everyone. You've got 100% collection. But then we've moved to behavioral data that starts dropping. So Mark, I'm curious from your perspective with kind of CrowdConnected and the indoor, how much can you really collect that?
Yeah, so I think the couple of ways that we think about this, which is what are you trying to achieve, in terms of the data, and that might guide you to how you're going to go about collecting it, as opposed to what are the different technologies. And another way of thinking about this is, do I want to actively collect the data? In other words, when someone's tapping, or I'm going to scan them, or there is some action happening, which might also we might be able to understand intent from that. So if I tap on an exhibitor's lead retrieval system on their booth, on their stand, it's because I want to share my details. I actively want to share my details. but maybe I'm still interested in the exhibitor, but I've walked past the stand and there was no action beyond me walking past the stand, in which case maybe you need to be passively collecting data. So one way to think about this is around the outcomes, and the other way is around whether it's passive or active. Things that people do at large-scale events to collect data will be around those two, passive and active. Active, scans, taps, check-ins. In the old-fashioned way, it was people with clipboards asking for your name and checking you in. But it doesn't matter whether it's non-technical, technical. It was actually a capturing in that way, and it's an action. Passively is where everyone now has a mobile phone on them, and so maybe you're using that fact to be able to passively monitor people's movement around the area, because they've got the official app, and the official app is providing that function. So that's one way that you can monitor and measure movement passively. Another way might be because you put a tag on them, and that actually is performing the same function. It's technology that is monitoring and measuring their movement around and passively capturing their behavior, their dwell time, or their entry or their exit to a session, to a booth, to whatever it is. Does that answer your question, Tim?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I also think I think the percentage of people that you get this kind of passive behavioral data set is like, what are you typically looking at? 50, 60, 70%? What is kind of the percentage of people that you think you can capture at a typical?
Yeah, so great question. If you put a tag on around everyone's neck, you might get towards 100%, but that might be an expensive way of collecting more expensive way of collecting this type of data. If you're using a mobile app, you're then governed by the app penetration, broadly speaking. But you're right, typically you might be at 50 or 60%. If you're trying to look at that data in aggregate, then it's a sampling exercise. Just as Explori will send a survey to a sample post-event, we're doing the same thing here. We're sampling the entire audience and extrapolating from that sample. Clearly, if I want to know exactly where Tim Groot has moved around the event, then I need to make sure that I have the data on Tim Groot as an individual.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's actually kind of a good example that we talk about at Grip in terms of behavioral data around app usage, right? So some customer comes to us and say, oh, only 60% of people use the app. So maybe what do I really need one? Or especially when it's like a very big trade show of 50,000 people and it's maybe kind of has a strong consumer element. Maybe there's only, let's say 30% or 35% of people that download the app. And my opinion on this is always like, well, those are maybe your power users. They're super influential. And they are the ones that are sending maybe 60, 70% of all meeting requests to the rest of the participants that are maybe just using the web platform or accepting meetings from their email. So you get a kind of a power user group that gives you insight into the overall audience and kind of incentivizes and kind of energizes the whole audience. So Rich, I'm curious from you, what kind of penetration levels in terms of collection of sentiment data, how do you maximize that? And how do you make sure you get a really good grip on the sentiment of your audience?
Yeah, nice use of the word grip there, Tim. I enjoyed that. Really got to get that in. So look, I'd say on average, we publish these benchmarks. They're publicly available. You're looking between 15 and 20% response rate across exhibitor and visitor surveys. Now, for most trade shows, in fact, for almost all trade shows, that is enough of a sample to give you an indicative understanding of the performance DNA, if you like, of that whole event. It gives you a holistic view of what performance looks like, because over the years, we've done many studies when people say to us, oh, no, but that's only just the people who really, really love it, or it's only the people who hate it, or it's, just these polarized views. We have so many people that respond to surveys all around the world, and all our customers will know this, that sit right in the middle as well. So it's a very good indicative view of performance at a holistic level. And that 15 to 20% mark is enough. Could it be better? Yes. Would it be beneficial if there was a higher response rate? Also, yes. Can organizers do more to do that? Absolutely, yes. And I've had a number of sessions I had one with Clarion North America, very recently, to talk about just that. What can we do to try and improve our response rate? It's a really common thing that we get asked, and it's a very interesting kind of area of
so what's your response?
Discussion.
When Claire in North America asked that, what is your response?
Well, the response was spend half an hour talking about it. If you want, we can do that now, but I'm guessing maybe not. So the kind of top lines are, people need to feel that you actually genuinely do care about the survey. There is this kind of general conception that sometimes happens in some audiences where you think that survey is a bit of an afterthought. It's only just something that populates, brochures and websites after the event. But truthfully, the thoughtful organizers out there, which I think is most of them these days, are the ones that are looking deeply into the sentiment data and the behavioral data and the analytics, and trying to curate their events in a customer-centric way. What that means is you need to let the people who are coming to your event know that you're doing that. So, our recommendation is let them know that you really care. Shake people's hands on the way out and say, please, can you complete the survey? Have some more signage around the event to show that it's really important to you. And maybe, if you're brave enough, offer some kind of a process, which sometimes I call airing of the dirty laundry, where you're being open enough to say, look, yes, we did this fabulously, and we've got this amazing NPS, and we've got satisfaction through the roof, and we've got all these great buyers. But actually, this area is one that we didn't do as well as we'd hoped, and you told us that we didn't do great on that, and this is what we're doing next time to improve that. And because people trust brands that they feel are honest and open and consistent with their message, and if you're just constantly saying how great you are all the time, people just switch off to it. So that I've done half an hour in about 45 seconds there, so that's as good as it gets.
I've got something to add to that, which is from experience from consumer events. We do a lot of work with consumer events. Think a big, large-scale music festival, for example. And they're equally, they want to get that sentiment. They want to understand from their customers, because they talk about their visitors as customers because they spend money on the ticket, but they're customers, about their experience. And they're doing things like triggering micro surveys when you enter or exit various areas of the event. So to Richard's point about they want to demonstrate that they really do want to listen, but they want to listen in the moment. They want to listen when it's relevant and it's within the context. So they're breaking down what might have been a big post-event survey into little chunks and trying to deliver that and get the feedback from visitors as and when they can.
We actually also we actually did something similar pre-COVID for from 2017 to 2020. We actually had a little survey that would pop up after a certain amount of usage in our web platform and in our mobile app. And we just asked just some kind of platform feedback, scoring ratings and so forth. And we used it to show to customers how customers that were only using our web platform, we had a much lower kind of satisfaction rate and actually NPS on the platform experience compared to customers that were using the web plus the mobile app. Because there was this discussion whether you need mobile apps and whether you could use a different mobile. So it's very interesting, I think, to collect feedback, not just post-event in a general survey, but as you say, to do these kind of micro moments to kind of get that micro sentiment. And I know of an organizer, a big one in the US, that actually does surveys and kind of sentiment analysis during each day and then actually implements it the next day. And then combines that with the different audiences. So they'll be like, the C-level audience gave us this feedback on day one, and that's the changes we're going to make sure that particular audience is more satisfied with their experience. I think that becomes really interesting. Richard, I don't know if you're seeing anything like that as well.
Yeah, I've got to mention something here, otherwise my research directors will absolutely kill me. So from a research methodology perspective, whilst I understand definitely that there's value in collecting kind of micro moments or using those kind of moments in time to understand feedback, it's quite dangerous to the overall response rate of the post-event feedback survey if you over-survey people. People get what we call survey fatigue, where then the post-event survey comes through and they just think, I've already answered 15 surveys this week. I don't think I need to do another one. They've had my feedback now. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because the post-event feedback is designed to be very strategic. It's not about the quality of the Wi-Fi and whether the toilets were clean. It's not about, whether the seat had enough seating areas. It's what were your objectives and how did you meet them? What can we do to deliver improved experiences? How do we improve your NPS? How do we improve this and that? How do we deliver a better, more profitable, more important event to our audience? So the challenge is sometimes collecting those micro, more tactical kind of response moments. It's useful, but you have to be quite cautious with it because you don't want to detract from that big picture where sometimes some brands only have one chance every year to get 20% response to a survey. If they send a survey out any other time of year, they might get 1%. So it's your one chance to get in real strategic detail about what is driving the performance of your event. And yeah, there's just a moment of caution there on, and there are some organizers that are doing it, and we've kind of made it clear from a research methodology perspective why it might not be perfect, but if you have specific needs and it's particularly important and there's a real strategic element, then go for it.
It's a good point. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
I think broadly, there's a kind of overarching point here, which is the ability to drive decision making from the insight that you're getting from the data that you're collecting in whatever way you're collecting the data. And the behavioural data is kind of interesting here. We see, to your point, Tim, about shows trying to optimize, if you like, the experience for delegates, for attendees, for visitors. The ones that we see working, where this is working really well, is they are paying attention to the insights that they're getting from the data during the course of the show. So to give you an example, you've got a show and it's got a new layout. The layout has changed fundamentally from the last time you ran this show. And you will probably want to understand as quickly as possible the distribution of flow of traffic, footfall around your entire show, so that maybe it's imbalanced more than it probably would be. I mean, all shows have imbalanced footfall, but more maybe than you're expecting, than you were expecting. Now, if you've got that insight very early on, maybe you can take action to address that issue. And back to the micro surveys, maybe the micro surveys are just designed tactically, as you say, Richard, and not to get in the way of the strategic stuff. And I think that's a very well made point. But tactically, maybe there are some things that you think, do you know what? If we get some very quick feedback, maybe we can do something about this. We don't need to wait till next year's event. And there's some kind of interesting use cases where that data collection, either and behavioural data, I think plays into this, probably less so than the sentiment stuff and the demographic data that we talked about. The ability to make decisions and drive outcomes that you're looking to drive.
Well, I think that a lot of organizers have been playing around with implementing data platforms and data lakes and so forth, and getting all of this data into one place. And the big challenge that many of them that I've spoken to about this phase is like, okay, now all of it is in one place, but now it needs to be actionable. And how am I now going to actually use it to make decisions? And even if I made the decisions, so somebody has done the effort of looking at this dashboard and QuickSight or whatever kind of Snowflake or whatever system you use for it. It's actually, how do I do that consistently to refine it? And I think that that's where technology needs to be much better, right? So if I look at, because if you look at the simplest level of behavioral data, of course, what we get with people getting a recommendation and either requesting a meeting or skipping or declining a meeting and skipping the recommendation they've been given. What we do with the AI is that you automatically then improve the recommendation. So we look at maybe 20 different strategies. And if a strategy is consistently not resulting in good recommendations because people aren't interacting with those, then we can switch those off automatically. The system does it automatically and favors other strategies that are then used to recommend the right people to meet with. And so I think technology should not just be about providing insights and saying, oh, this is actionable, you can do something with this, because it still then requires a human to actually analyze it and then take the next steps with it. It's about how can technology take that step away and automatically improve it. So, Mark, maybe we'll get to, similar to what you're getting Google Maps, right? Like there is multiple routes to get to the same point. And maybe we can, guide people to walk a certain route on a floor plan to be going through the less busy areas rather than the busy aisles. And that'd be nice.
Yeah, but that's a really good example, isn't it? Where if you understood, this is very idealistic, because I'm not saying people are doing this today, but if you understood, certainly not on the exhibition floor, if you understood not only the declared data, so someone's filled in a registration form and they've come to a show and they've said that they're really interested in I don't know what it is. It's a retail show and they're really interested in buying candles, and you could see that they've visited so far 8 of the 12 candle booths, candle vendors, candles, the people selling candles that are at this particular retail show. You could highlight, couldn't you, on the floor plan? You could, and you could try and guide them, and that's about personalization. And that's to your point, Tim. There, what you're doing is using the data to try and enhance the experience for the person.
So just kind of riffing on that for a moment, right? So we're introducing something. We actually introduced it last year for an event called Digital X. It takes over the whole city, and we do walking routes. And it's actually something we're going to roll out across the platform in the summer, which is that people can create walking routes. And something that we saw, and that I think is a super interesting kind of concept, is that they were analyzing those walking routes and which walking routes people were maybe not taking to create new walking routes for the next day to then go via areas that were maybe underserved. And so if you could layer that into the sentiment data and kind of other interaction points to know what's really happening and what people are happy with and where the less busy areas are that you can see with the CrowdConnected data, that's been really powerful, right? Because now you can start influencing the show kind of shape and size much more in real time. Cool. I want to make sure that we jump to kind of the next big section, which is, all right, we've got the data, we've got it in our platforms, we've got the demographic, the behavioral, the sentiment. Hopefully, to some extent, we've been able to get it into a single system, whether that is within Explori or a data lake, or maybe combining some sources in Grip or in CrowdConnected or other tools. But I'm really curious, kind of what is now the next step, right? Like, what are some of the common challenges? And Rich, I'm going to go to you first. What are some of the common challenges faced by organizers, and how can they, make sure that they're really using data strategically? What is the next step there?
Well, the biggest challenge, to be honest, is one that's also relatively out of our control, which is, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, but the biggest challenge is organizers having processes that ensure that this data is used as part of their event direction, as part of their event strategy. So we often, as many of you will know, we're both a kind of research agency and a research technology platform. So we have some self-service users, some managed service users. And even when we're delivering, 90-minute, very, very granular post-event research presentations, which go into a phenomenal level of detail about what is driving the performance of that event, and to a certain extent, what gears and levers an organizer can pull to try and improve performance into the next time. There are occasions where occasionally we'll come back the next year and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's fabulous. Thanks so much. Yeah, great. We come back the next year and maybe some of the same challenges exist, because turning insight into action is not easy. But to be honest, what you really need is processes in place, and perhaps more importantly, accountability that's driven from the top of the business, a culture of customer experience, if you like, that allows organizers to be brave and to say, I want to make this decision. And I know you're going to come to this, Tim, but it's the conversation around whether gut feel is driving event strategy. And I say gut feel, and what I mean by that is kind of experience, if you like, the experience of a portfolio director, a managing director, an event director, alongside maybe some very loud exhibitors in this ear and some very prominent attendees in this ear. And is that defining your strategy, or are you using the evidence you're able to collect from combining and integrating all your data sources, getting fabulous insight to help you understand what's happening, and evidencing what it might just be evidencing gut feel? Yes, this is confirmed. People want this. They need that. This group is under delivering, whatever. And executing on that, but actually taking that piece, closing that feedback loop, that's where the real skill comes in. And I think, I think that's the area that organizers can and will acknowledge that that's the area of improvement.
So the kind of like data-driven event design. How do we kind of? I think, Mark, like going to you first. Like, do you have an example of where there was kind of where this gap is being closed, and the organizers that are able to close that gap of like from insights to implementation for the next show? Then, how are they doing that, and how are they delivering that continuous improvement, that data flywheel to really make that data-driven decision making?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of examples. If you understand how people are moving around the show floor, you can essentially map the footfall, and you might map the footfall against how much you're charging each exhibitor for the position on the show floor. Now, typically, you're going to be charging premium for position that's right at the front, opposite the entrance, the larger the space. But interestingly, what we've seen is with some analysis of how footfall moves around the show floor, there's the ability to look at pricing strategies based upon how footfall is distributed. We've shown, for example, that strategic placement of large brands around the show floor can have a halo effect on smaller exhibitors that are positioned close to them, and we've got now the data to show that. We've shown categorically that when people arrive, they typically turn left or right. There is a bias typically at a show, and that will be dependent upon a number of environmental factors. We had a show that we worked on at Excel that was used to just be in North Hall. For those of you familiar with Excel, essentially there's a big boulevard in the middle, or those of you not familiar, so there's a big boulevard in the middle, and there's a north set of halls in the north of the boulevard and a set of halls to the south of the boulevard. And typically, when people arrive, they turn left and they go into the North Hall, which means that if your show straddles north and south, you've got an immediate bias towards the North Hall. Now, you might know that, but actually being able to measure how big a bias that is really important, and then being able to do something about it. Maybe you want to look at how your show is going to be laid out in future iterations of the show. So there are a number of ways that understanding that behavioral data can help. As Richard said, it might just be validating your gut feel, but it also might be actually conflicting with your gut feel. It might be telling you something new and giving you things that you can drive decisions from.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely something. I've got a good example of that. I've got a customer that has got like app ratings across a number of factors, right? Like ease of navigation, ease of finding sessions, connecting with other delegates, and we've been able to combine that kind of rating data set with the data set inside the platform, like based on behavior, like views, clicks, meeting requests, and so forth, session attendance, and then combining those two data sets to understand where does the opportunity lie to improve this, right? And if we are going to implement this particular new functionality or make this more easily available on the homepage, then that's going to have an impact on these particular factors. And that's really where you start then being able to measure and close that gap to kind of create that continuous feedback loop. Well, Richard, since you kind of brought it up, I'm curious, what are you seeing how are organizers closing that gap with Explori, and what are you seeing the good ones are doing to be able to really kind of build that kind of continuous feedback loop?
I mean, I kind of touched upon it earlier in terms of the response rate piece, which is, improving response rate also benefits with engagement. And when you have higher engagement, you typically have better event scores. But, I want to touch upon, I'm not sure to specifically answer your question, but I want to touch upon something in terms of examples of an organizer that has used kind of feedback in a more specific way. So we work with IMEX. I'm sure many of you will know of IMEX, fabulous event organizer for the event industry, predominantly based down in Brighton in the UK. And we started working with them maybe 2018, 2019, something like that. They were using kind of SurveyMonkey approach before. And when we first measured their events are phenomenal. Explori has benchmarked 6,500 events all across the world, and they are in the top 1%. And I'm sure they'll be very delighted about me telling everybody about that. But they still want to improve. And they noticed, and we noticed in a post-event service that we delivered for them, that actually their first-time attendees were seeing a bit of a more disappointing performance in terms of satisfaction, NPS, likelihood of return, importance of event, and other important metrics versus the rest of their audience. So they used the information from that insight presentation, and they created a strategy to deliver a better experience for first-time attendees. Because, keeping people who have already come is easier than attracting new people, right? So that's a very specific example of where one organizer, despite delivering genuinely one of the best trade shows in the world, are still looking at the kind of finer details and say, well, which part can we continue to look at? And there are examples all over of these kind of, it's that Michael Jordan 1% gains, trying to constantly find the little bit of value that you can get and try and push the boundaries and improve just that tiny bit more, iteration after iteration. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but it might do.
No, I think that's actually, like, I think you actually give a really good example there of combining different data sets and actually getting more out of it, because you're combining the demographical data set of understanding which people are there for the first time. You're then looking at probably what experience are those people having. And then you're seeing in the sentiment data, hey, these people are not as happy. And so we have to then track back, like, what are we missing in terms of the behaviors of this group of people that we need to enhance or that we need to introduce to be able to make sure that they retain better and that they are happier. And I think that's a really good example. First timers is probably the most interesting kind of group of people for any organizer, because if you can improve the experience for the first timers, like, retention is everything within the events industry. And that's why I think, you know, all of these data sets are so important and are taking a much more proactive view. So yeah, Mark,
Yeah, I've got another example of that with Tim. We worked with a show where they asked us to categorize their attendees with no prior knowledge. They just wanted to look at the data that we collected on people's movement around the show, and they came up with the hypothesis that there were three types of attendee. There were boothers, people who wanted to go and do business, do deals at booths, go to the show floor and stands. There were networkers, people who wanted to be in meetings, in networking, specific networking areas. And there were educators or trainers, people who'd come for the content sessions. And so they looked at the data and asked us to put people into one of those three buckets based on whether they over-indexed on time spent either on the show floor or in the networking areas or in the content theatres. And they then used that to understand how well the show had scored for each of those types of person based upon the post-show sentiment stuff that they'd done, with a view to trying to actually sell the show better to those different types of people. So a good example there of combining data sets strategically to drive the show's value, and particularly again to address the issue of churn. And churn is highest; it's always highest with first time visitors. If you can get people over the first time. And I think the rule from retail applies here, probably costing you 5 to 10 times more to acquire a new visitor, a new delegate, a new attendee than it is, or even an exhibitor, than it is to retain one. You know, and it's a really, really significant cost factor for you. If you can retain people, that's going to make a fundamental difference to the business.
I'll take it one step further if I can just interject there. Retaining people is the first and most important step. But if you are retaining people by delivering improved advocacy, which is the measure of our NPS, and improved satisfaction and the other KPIs, what you also deliver is a kind of better bang for your buck, if you like, from a marketing spend, from an organic visitor or an organic exhibitor perspective. We know that events that are higher performing on the satisfaction ratings, on the NPS ratings, and so on, are typically the ones that are growing the fastest. We've done a huge metadata analysis of our platform. We know that the events with the highest performance are the ones that have the best commercial performance, if you like. So by retaining your audience, you are likely improving satisfaction and all the other important metrics. If you are improving those metrics, you are also making it easier for your sales team to recruit exhibitors, making it easier for your marketing team to get bums on seats and to get people through the door. So it works on every level if you start focusing deeply and on a granular level to who are the customer groups that are driving the performance down on our show, and how do we refocus on delivering better experience for them one by one, time after time, persona by persona, to deliver better commercial outcomes in the long run. So this whole customer-centric strategy is not just a buzzword. I was about to say a naughty word there, but it does say keep it clean over your shoulder there, Tim. But it's not just a buzzword. It actually makes a difference to your bottom line.
Exactly, and that commercial point I think is really interesting. And Mark, I actually want to make sure that you mention what you do with Bluebird and how some organizers like Hive and others are using that to kind of help them sell to exhibitors. So that sales process.
Yes. So we've been talking a lot about some quite big strategic stuff, but if actually we go focus this down on the operation of a show where you are rebooking exhibitors, and there is a there is real pressure on sales teams to deliver as good a rebook operation. And by rebook, I mean getting the exhibitor who is already on the at this year's show to commit to next year's show. Hopefully they've had a good show, and you can upsell them to a bigger, more valuable position. You can extract more from them in terms of their spend. But in order to do that, you need really to understand how that exhibitor has performed. And typically sales teams have a patchy understanding at best as to whether that exhibitor may or may not have had a good show. They may have some access to lead retrieval statistics and insights, but possibly not. So leads is one way that you might want to measure that, but footfall is another way to measure it. So just by giving sales teams really easy to understand, how did this exhibitor booth rank for performance based on footfall? Did they rank well, in the middle, poorly for this area against their competitors? Just give me some just very quick insight as a salesperson, please, as to how this exhibitor's performed, because when I want to go and talk to them, I need to weave that into the narrative. If I can weave that into the narrative, I'm much more likely to have a good outcome from that sales conversation than if I am just going into that flying blind, going, no idea how this exhibitor has performed, but I'm going to still try and sell them the show next year. So we have a specific micro product that all it does is it just takes the footfall data and translates that into exhibitor performance metrics. It's not that sophisticated. It's based on footfall. But you don't need to be hugely sophisticated here. You just need to understand that did this exhibitor do well for traffic past the stand? Did it do well for dwell? So that's that Bluebird product. Good example of taking behavioral data, the movement of people around, and just focusing it on a single outcome. The outcome is how can we drive more revenue? How can we get more yield?
Yeah, no, definitely, it's a good point. And so I think it's actually similar to what we're seeing at Grip, right? With people using behavioral data in that kind of rebook process. So I've had customers that have their Grip dashboard open for their sales teams, where they can see how many leads, meetings, contacts, views, and so forth an exhibitor has had. We've got like a dedicated kind of exhibitor leads page where you can select an exhibitor and it shows you that information. And that's, kind of, you're combining different sets of behavioral data. And I think that's, kind of where it becomes quite interesting. And all of that really helps you back up your rebook strategy for next year's show. I think we've covered a lot of ground already. Just seeing if there was anything that we haven't touched upon. Is there anything, Rich, Mark, that either of you feel that we haven't touched upon? You think it's important?
I mean, I'm pretty sure we could go on for about another 3 or 4 hours, to be honest with you, Tim. But I think everyone else will be falling asleep. So for me, unless there's anything else from you guys, I think we can always save it for another session.
Yeah, exactly. Mark, anything?
Yeah, all I would say is I think this can often, you can feel like, we're drowning in data. We've got too much data. Or how do we join all of these data sets up together? I think there was some. I think always a good place to start is what problems are we trying to solve, or what do we really need to do, and then backtrack from that and go, well, what data, what insight would help us solve that problem, and think about it from that perspective. And that might be as simple as I don't really understand how whether people are navigating my show efficiently. It's back to Richard's point. If 7 meetings is for a particular show is the kind of indicator of success. If people can't get to 7 meetings because they can't find the 7 meetings that they're having, that's a specific problem. It's a navigation problem. Then maybe understanding how people move around the show and how you could help them move around the show is the problem you're trying to fix. So I always think start with the problem or the solution where you want to get the outcome you want to come to, and then back to what data would you need in order to be able to tackle that problem.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Yeah. So, for everyone, thank you so much for joining. We covered a lot of ground here, going from the different data sets of demographical, behavioral, and sentiment data, how you collect it, what kind of benchmarks you could expect in that sense, and then, of course, what you can do with it. So it talks about how it can be used in the sales process, how it can be used in your strategy to enhance next year's event, and that kind of data-driven decision-making, and covered lots of ground in between that. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Mark. Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us here today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a nice day. See you all. Bye-bye.